Now we are devoting our final session this morning to a Q&A panel with 6 leading security professionals from global brands in the chemical, information technology, fashion, tobacco, biotechnology and consumer goods sectors. Together, our panelists represent companies generating annual revenues of more than 250 billion euros. So let's meet them now to find out what supply chain security and resilience means to them. Please join me in welcoming our panel, Julia VINCKE, Vice President Security at BASF Group, David Hurd, Group Security Manager at Unilever, GINO LAIOS, Global Security Manager at Security Programs, Supply Chain and Manufacturing at Philip Morris International, KARSTEN GRIESSHAMMER, Senior Director, Head of Global Security and Protection at BioNTech, and FABIO BARBOSA, Head of Latin America Supply Chain Security at HP, and Daniel GARCIA, Head of Security, Risk Prevention and DPO at Desigual. Please join me in welcoming them all. Thank you. Well, I'm sure you agree we have a really fantastic lineup on the panel of manufacturers who are major customers for the logistics industry. So I do really encourage you to ask as many questions from the audience as possible. I have plenty here too, but we would love to hear from you. We have 2 people with microphones, so if anybody has any questions, do raise your hands, and then one of our 2 roving microphones will be with you and you can stand up and put your question to the panel widely or more specifically to an individual. First, though, let me start by asking all panel members to briefly introduce themselves and their role and summarize why supply chain security and resilience is so critical to their businesses. I'll start with you, Fabio, and we'll come along the line.
Well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here, guys. Supply chain security for our organization and HP is extremely important. And well, I'm here especially to talk about Latin America. It's a region that suffers more than 100 cargo hijackings per day. Facility invasions is a regular thing, occur every day during the afternoon, at night, at morning, in Chile, Brazil, Mexico, you choose. And all the companies in that region, especially high-tech, pharma, tobacco, they are suffering deeply with this situation. So for us, supply chain security is extremely important, and I'm here to answer whatever questions that you have for the region, and I can help.
Well, good morning, everyone. I think it's still fair to say good morning, right? So we as the biggest chemical company in the world, obviously we produce 700 immediate products, which are relevant for other industries as well. And some of them are regulated, like dual-use products. And we also deal with regard to the automotive industry with batteries and catalysts that we produce. And by doing so, we have highly, highly valuable goods as gold, platinum, and nickel that appear increasingly on the radar of criminal networks. And speaking about Brazil, we do have some trouble in Brazil, but I might touch on that one later on. So it's good to be here, and it seems to be a fantastic audience. So I hope you enjoy the panel.
Gino.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back, and thank again for TAPA to put this line up. I'm very fortunate to be part of it with my fellow panelist. Why is supply chain important for Philip Morris or for any tobacco? I mean, I have my tobacco working group colleagues here, so they will probably think the same. We as an industry, and it's not only about Philip Morris, it's an industry that is disrupting itself, which is probably quite strange. And then it used to be the usual chicken and the egg discussion. You know, you had salespeople saying, if we don't sell, then operations doesn't produce. And then you had operations people that said, if you don't produce, you don't sell. But then something was left in the middle, and that was supply chain. And I think we are living in the times where supply chain starts to become more and more important. I think everybody that has been speaking before us yesterday and today has made that point. And it's also important for us. We have went from what you call the traditional manufacturer to a more complex and with other lines of. We've entered the electronics production, which is a challenge of itself, especially with the trade and the usual supply chain challenges that you have in Asia. And because of that, also security and what we do day to day, it's important to follow. So without the supply chain, it's obviously like everybody else, which is producing something and gets to a consumer, whatever the consumer is. If you don't have that secured, then there's lots of other challenges that we have to deal with. And I think in the past years, we have been managing to get from an organization which was very much reactive to a process where we are taking a lot of measures and a lot of steps and work with the business to be more and more proactive and actually work with you guys and with all our partners and providers in order to make that happening and make it more and more secure. And I look forward to your questions as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Gino. David, let me ask you to introduce yourself and again to summarize why supply chain security and resilience is so critical.
Okay, no, thanks for the opportunity. My name's David Hurd, I'm the Group Security Manager. Just for context, Unilever has been around quite a long time. As it stands at the moment as Unilever, it started in 1930 with the Lord Leverhulme in Port Sunlight, with the Sunlight soap brand joining together with the Uni margarine company. So it's been around a long time. We've got about 300 countries, 300 factories across the world in 70 countries, and we distribute in 190 countries across the world. So we've got a massive operation. There is hybrid operations as well. So we talk, I think the previous presenter talked about micro factories, which is basically a 40-foot long container, one line, and can produce quite fast. And then there's also what we call collaborative manufacturing, which is third-party manufacturing that receive the blueprints and they manufacture on behalf of Unilever. So actually why supply chain is important, because it's important to the customer. If the customer receives a defective brand from manufacturing, that's one part of the problem. But if it receives its brand late or the brand isn't on the shelves, that's another part of the problem. So we need to ensure that when we're manufacturing at fast pace and we filling the consumer's household full of consumer goods, that manufacturing is not just one part of the components. The sourcing of the raw material, the pack material, the converting it into a product that the customer recognizes and wants to buy, and more importantly, distributing it on time and getting it into the retail units on time is key to winning in the market. And that's why supply chain security and any breakdown in that chain is very important to us.
Thank you, David. Karsten.
Yeah, my name is Karsten. No one any longer wants to talk about the pandemic. We're all happy that it's over, but it's not over for that long. If you think about 3 years ago, yeah, most of our lives, especially in security, has changed a lot. Yeah, I'm working for BioNTech. I was hired there in April 2021 as the first security professional, and was just at that time that the vaccine had to be brought to the world. It was a more or less new product. It was pretty unclear on which kind of warehouse can be used, how can it be brought on a global level. Especially at the beginning, there was a much higher demand than a supply. Thinking about that the first vaccines were secured by police. Yeah? So that's a special sort of resilience for a supply chain that you don't have very often. But yeah, so to answer that question, resilient supply chain security is super important and needs to adapt. And if I think about, so I don't want to go too long, but if I think about how fast the industry has supported us, thinking about DHL, Frigotrans, but also many others who were really supporting us. Yeah, so that supply chain security was very important the last 2 years for us.
Thank you, Karsten. Daniel, please do introduce yourself as well.
So for Desigual, supply chain is crucial. I mean, taking the example of the pandemic, during the pandemic we closed the office and we could manage. We were prepared for it, but it was easier than we expected. We were obliged to close the stores, physical stores, but we could manage with digital selling, but we could not close the supply chain because otherwise it will mean to close completely the business. And thanks to the work of the supply chain, we can say that the company survived. So the supply chain, we approach it under the security integral point of view, and with the all resources and the resilience on it, it's one of our main goals for the company. That's for sure.
Thank you all. Julia, let me come and start with you. And a reminder, we have 2 people walking around. If you do just want to ask a question, put your hand up at any time and make sure I see you. Julia, as I said, let me start with you. Can you tell us more about why supply chain security is such a key focus for the chemical industry? And does the industry have specific measures in place with regard to precious metals?
Yeah, regarding precious metals, I was touching that shortly in the introduction. As we are dealing with products like gold and nickel and cobalt, they're highly valuable. And what we see increasingly is violent attacks on our trucks, mainly in South Africa, in Brazil, but also in Mexico. And assuming that we agreed on Chatham House rules yesterday, a couple of months ago, we actually had one very violent attack in South Africa on one of our trucks and lost 5 million in a day. And secondly, we had an assault or a robbery in one of our sites in Brazil. We were pretty sure that we were dealing with an inside job, so you can basically have all the security measures in place that are needed. But if you're dealing with insider threats, then basically it's becoming very difficult to prevent those things. And in Brazil, they really raided one of our sites for 3 hours, including hostage taking. And you know, the loss was around 6 million in a few hours. And we don't have only to deal with the physical loss or damage of the precious metals that were taken, but you can imagine that if you deal with such violent incidents, you have employees taken as hostages, it takes quite a while to recover from that. And you know, as I said, and I think the colleagues from Amazon were displaying that yesterday as well, it's not only the physical loss, it's the loss of trust, the loss of reputation, increasing logistic costs. We have increasing fees of insurances because as you can imagine, they were not necessarily happy if you have 2 incidents in a row in basically 7 days. Yeah, so what we see, and that really is a problem, is increased violence when it comes to getting a grip on precious metals.
Let me ask you all a little bit about the pandemic as well, because Karsten, you touched on that when you introduced yourself. So I'll come to you if you want to expand a little bit more on what you said about how the security situation for BioNTech changed during those times. And maybe if anybody else wants to chip in afterwards about, you know, sort of lessons learned or changes from the pandemic. Karsten.
Yeah. So before the pandemic started, BioNTech was heavily focusing on research and development for cancer drugs. And no one really knew BioNTech if you weren't in the BioNTech field, biotechnology field. And suddenly, more or less out of nowhere, there was this public interest, this global interest on that company. Maybe, I don't know from where you are coming from, most of the countries it was marketed as the Pfizer vaccine, but it was created in lovely Mainz in Germany, a very small town. It was a very small company, and suddenly all of these things from the world, all of these threats, all of that interest was popping up. And if I think about my first day at BioNTech, as I said, I was the first security professional there. I was asked, how many cameras do we need for a new building? There's a complaint about the guard. There was an agency calling us that there was a big demonstration announced. The Pfizer colleagues were calling me about, there's a potential counterfeit case in a European country. And with this interest on the company, the security threats exploded more or less, and then you need good partners from the industry, but also partners like TAPA. So it was very early that I was calling Thorsten about, can TAPA support us? Yeah? And they actually did. So I was thinking about when we met with our insurance broker, and we were in one of the warehouses, yeah? And it was clear that most of the vaccines that should be sent to the world will go through this warehouse. And the insurance broker got super nervous because he said, okay, how much money will be here based on products, yeah? And how will we secure it, yeah? And then everyone was facing me, and I was like, we follow TAPA standards, and the insurance broker was like, yeah, that's a good idea, that's what we do, because he knew the standard, yeah? And he knew that it's more or less the best practice that can be used. So I'm very happy that we have these standards and that we can use them, yeah? And by the way, also our partners like DHL, yeah? So there were ongoing discussions on how can we bring it to the governments in the world, yeah? And also there we were happy to hear that they are also following the TAPA standards, because we did not have much time to do proper on-site audits and stuff like that. Yeah? But if we see, okay, it's TAPA B, TAPA C, or whatever, this really helps us, or helped us. Yeah.
Thank you. Gino, I could see you nodding. What lessons learned would you say you have, or what impact did it give to you?
Well, I think whenever you are in manufacturing, and I think COVID was something that you always say you have a plan for, but when it hits you, you have like no plan. In reality, because we talk about the plans and they are sit on the paper, but what are people doing about it? I think that was the moment where you actually realize why is it important that you look not only at the security part, but also look at the safety part. I think there is an absolute safety component in what we do as a security, and I would agree if you don't agree. But that was something that pandemic has actually learned us. So it was not only about securing your supply chain, but actually how do you protect and how you safeguard what you are producing, yeah? And let's not forget that you had, we also had issues like, people couldn't come, and we dealt it with a lot of things like that. But what it actually learned us is that when it's about the crisis, everything that you plan for is not really what it's happening in reality. Julia just mentioned, which probably is not really related with all these events that we have. We have a big operations in South America, and I can talk for hours of what is happening to us every day. But that was, you add criminality, and then you add a pandemic, and then you are in a, it's kind of a point of no return. So the lesson that we've learned there as an organization is that as more as you get yourself ready for the unknown, the better you are able to deal with. And yes, obviously, we got the help from everybody that we worked with. You have your logistics, internal logistics partners, you have your logistic operator that it's there. And I think that was something that we've all went through successfully, but we also should not forget it. Karsten just mentioned it only happened 3 years ago. And unfortunately, we have a very short memory when it happens when bad things happen, and we tend to forget them. But we should not forget that what has happened 3 years ago can actually happen in the next 5-6 months. I obviously don't want to be right. But that's something that we need all to keep in mind, because we tend to go back to business as usual, and we forget that a crisis, a situation can hit you at any given moment, whether that's a pandemic or whether that's a, kind of a violent thing, or you are targeted, you are raided. It can happen at any point in time. And it's not only about securing the product, and I keep on saying the same thing. The ultimate goal is to secure a human life. The cargo is the cargo, and we keep on talking about the cargo, the importance of the cargo, and left and right, and what's the value, and so on and so forth. But again, what happens when you have people which are being taken hostage? What happens when you have a guy in a distribution van that has probably $5,000 worth of product that it's murdered at gunpoint? How would you deal with that? So we need to think about the way we are managing the crisis and also what COVID has actually helped us to understand.
Thank you, Gino. Daniel, before we move on to looking at some of the sort of countries that pose particular threats, did you want to add anything to that? Because you touched on the pandemic in your introduction as well.
Well, I mean, I think that in the last years, almost all organizations got plenty conscious about the importance of the continuity plannings and recovery plannings. And pandemic have been a very good example, but especially when we talk about supply chain, we could see that was crucial again. I mean, without supply chain, even when most of the world was closed, we still could survive. And we still could keep not only the business, but also the idea that we will advance, because a lot of people was working to make possible that everyone could get the goods. And not only the extremely needed like food, also things to survive at home, to keep calm, to stay mentally and physically well. So supply chain demonstrated during the pandemic that was a very important thing for all of us that maybe in the daily basis we don't see, but in a crisis time we could see it perfectly.
David, let me come to you now and open it up to more panelists, of course, but where does Unilever distribute to, and which products and countries in EMEA pose the largest risk are you finding for general thefts and syndicated thefts?
Yeah, so we distribute all over Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So we touched on South Africa. You can hear by my accent, I'm originally South African. So talk about the power outage example. If you really want to test that out, go to South Africa. They're living and breathing it every day. But South Africa offers a unique perspective with corruption and high risk for collusion. Most of Africa, we have operations across Africa. We've got a rich heritage in West Africa, business that is almost 100 years old in Nigeria, CDI. We've got East African business in Kenya. So those three kind of hubs pose all different aspects. A lot to do, what Gino was saying, it's about the safety of the driver in those circumstances. There is an old saying in Africa, there's no such thing as a hijacking, because it often is very orchestrated behind the scenes. So it's a bunch of actors, getting their payroll, their bag of money at every step through. And when you do the detailed investigation and you see who was involved with insider threats and who influenced who, you can actually play it out on a map if you have time and understand who the people of interest that were involved. And often it is the same player. So Africa offers a unique perspective. Middle East is also a difficult ground for us for cargo. We have challenges between Oman, Dubai, and Saudi Arabia particularly. There's a syndicate operating in those areas for years, and they sort of go underground. And then when they know it's time, they will come out and they will specifically take a truck or two in a region, and they're very organized. Their modus operandi is they bring in drivers from South Asia, Pakistan, India. They pay them to drive. They're vetted by the strict protocols, and then they're paid on a plane to go back to South Asia. So the police there never really get to the bottom of the story. And then in Europe, I was interested in the TIS reporting for the UK. It is the highest reporting. We've got a similar system in Unilever called Siren, where we log every single cargo incident, MO, whether it was a large truck, whether it was a hijacking, whether we recovered it, whether it was half a truck, whether it was one pallet, a petty theft, etc. And UK does stand out as the highest, but that's because the reporting is very good. The police are pretty good. Germany, we've had our fair share of fake couriers, and also in Italy, we've had fake couriers as well, which is that emerging risk that scares me the most, that the phantom carrier, you don't know who the adversary is, and they come in and take your truck through sleight of hand, and they manipulate the digital environment that we're all trying to operate in. So those are kind of the broad regions where, would keep me awake at night in terms of cargo risk and being resilient in those markets and trying to mitigate that threat.
Julia, maybe you could add to that. Do you have any particular hotspots or areas where you're particularly looking at, regions that you're particularly looking at?
If I would name the top 3 hotspots, it would be South Africa, Brazil and Mexico, definitely. But what is really disgusting is, by the way, when you deal with crisis, and the latest is obviously the Ukraine crisis, criminal opponents, let's call it like this, will always find their chance for new business models. Sometimes I wish that we would be so quick in developing new business models. But what happened is that, with a glance to Ukraine, which happens to be the corn and crop supplier on a global level, we see that products like fertilizers are targeted first, because obviously they became really hot goods and appeared on the radar or spotlight of criminal opponents. So what we see is that we are targeted also not in regard to precious metals, but also to fertilizers. And what we see is that the black market is increasing when it comes to fertilizers, especially, by the way, again, in Brazil, sorry to say. But yeah, and that is really disgusting. And we saw that in the pandemic. I mean, how quick were people with fake vaccination passes or whatsoever. And each crisis creates a vacuum where criminal components jump in. And in the end, it has or generates really negative impacts on our supply chain. It's very disruptive.
Gino, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think, like Julia has mentioned, and also David opening, I think each region has what we call the special countries, which is unfortunate because they are not special, but it's where we need to put a lot of focus. I have this, I do a quarterly meeting with our presidents, and everybody's like, trying to picture their region as being whatever the best, and I keep on saying your region is special, but you have a couple of countries which give us some headaches. So if you go from, Philippines and Indonesia, where you have a huge footprint, but also it's very challenging on the supply chain with all the islands and everything, and you go to places like you need to do your own direct sales and distribution, your own cash collection, so that's already a very challenging environment. Then you go South Africa, unfortunately, but that's also a hotspot. We also have a manufacturing footprint there. So I think only last year there was a huge strike at the national level, which has impacted everybody, and that was really challenging. South America, with the the usual suspects, Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia. Just for you to kind of get a grip, in Brazil, on average, we have an attack a day. So our security team is basically, so just imagine you are a security manager in Brazil for Philip Morris, and you every morning when you wake up, you said, I'm going to have an incident to deal with. And that's, we don't actually think that much of the psychological impact that it's happening on the entire organization, because it's not, I'm not talking only about the security, my security colleagues, but it's also on the supply chain, on the manufacturing, because these things are happening. And then, we come closer to where we are. And then again, here we have our own challenges in Europe. We have, the challenges of the parkings and, the high cargo criminality in UK. And again, I think this is also, we get the information. So I come back to something which I think has been said yesterday. Also, Torsten encouraged that the more information we put out there, the better off we are, because, by sharing that type of information, we know how we can deal with it as an organization, but also as Sparta. So I think it's important also, by hearing my fellow panelists, is like, at one point we need to take that leap of faith in, breaking the boundaries and the barriers of not actually talking to each other just because somebody says it's not right. When it comes about criminality, we should not really forget that we among us, as whether that's, I'm talking on behalf of the tobacco guys or I'm talking as an industry manufacturer, the only competition we have is not with ourselves, it's with the criminal world out there. So they are the ones that, if it is to make it on a game of a market share, we should always have a better market share than them. And eventually, if we get to 100% to 0%, that would be ideal.
Fabio, maybe you would like to add something. We've spoken a lot about Brazil there, the particular hotspots, or if there are particular products, or if there's any response to some of the comments that have been made.
Well, when you say just one case per day, you are lucky, man. I can tell you. Your competitor probably is more. Well, in general, Latin America, as you saw, everybody mentioned the situation there, unfortunately, is not going better. No, it's continuing being worse every day. Cases, you will listen about cases like invasion in port in Chile, that the criminals took 14 containers of copper. 14 containers. You heard about the history that I can mention on the company because it was in the press, so it was just... Walmart suffered 2 facility invasions in two weeks. A competitor of Amazon, Mercado Libre, 3 times in 1 month invasion. More than 100 million in losses. This happens every moment there. Latin America is crazy. And people can say Wild West. Yeah, I believe in that. And one thing that we are learning, we are using all the technology that you guys from Europe and North America are developing. Like CCTV, we implemented CCTV inside of the cabin of the truck driver with facial recognition that if the criminal took the truck, the engine will block in less than 1 kilometer. That's simple. It could be simple, but we are doing that. High-value truck, high-value cargo, like our company and other companies, they are using armored trucks. They are replacing escorts by drones. They are installing a physical security with facial recognition in the factories that you can identify everybody that's running there. So the technology that you are developing here, we are using there. We are putting practice there. Every day we're learning more and more. And I think that one thing that definitely will change, you help it change at least the process is the traceability of products. I believe that the traceability of a product science that from the box is something that will change. People are listening a lot of our GPS controls, monitoring, trackers, a lot of stuff. But one thing that I believe that we can work with the consumer that they are buying products, that's stolen products, is how we can use these persons, these end customers, as, let's say, auditors and telling us what they are buying. How we are developing like new technologies with digital printing that you can create like a science QR code and serialize each box. So each box that you're selling for cell phones, computers, printers, pharmaceutical products, agriculture products that I know that a lot of a problem for you, sorry for that. Yeah. And you can track and trace every box serialized. This is a game changer. I believe on that because imagine using the end customer with some, how to say, marketing campaign telling that if you check your product, you can get like a 5% discount for buying a new one, something like that. The customer, you just scan the product and you can get the backbone of all the information. Where is he bought the product? And if the product was stolen, you get all the history from the serial number and you can get all the details. So traceability is the future. I believe in that. A lot of companies in Latin America believe in that. And believe me, the technology is from Europe and North America, and we are starting in Latin America because of our market.
And I'd like to talk a bit more to the other panelists about technology as well. But before I do, Fabio, you've mentioned there how you're using technology in the security aspect. But what about the criminal aspect? How much of a role does technology play for them?
Well, the technology for the criminals in general in Latin America is use a rifle and a pistol. Very simple. That's the technology. The other technology is calling the person that's working in like, sorry guys from DHL, Maersk, whatever. But it's very simple. The criminals approach the people that work inside of these companies. It's just simple. Say, or you give me the information, or I'll kill you or your family, period. How you prevent that? Communication, how you, with internal policies with your companies, with your partners, telling to inform if you have received a threat, transfer the person. For example, if you have a threat in some warehouse, transfer this person for other location so the criminals cannot approach this guy again. So the criminals in Latin America, at least, they are not so sophisticated. But what they're using, the threatening that they're using is very, let's say, very powerful. So that's what they are using there.
Thank you, Fabio. Who else would like to talk a little bit about technology? Yeah, GINO, in terms of technology that maybe you're using on how important it is, but also on the other side, perhaps.
Yeah, and look, I think everybody that has been talking before has been going around with the technology, and I think it's also a matter of what are you taking from the technology. Let's not forget that every technology that we are using in, let's say, managing risk, that has a counter technology behind where the bad guys are trying to do or trying to kill your technological, let's say, guard. I think was Torsten saying something about the flipper. I mean, he doesn't share it, but you know, it's that simple, and it's that scary. So it's also a matter to kind of map the risk that you have with the technology that you choose, and you make it as dynamic as possible so that you are always ahead of the game. Fabio was talking about the track and trace. We have a very successful story with the German police, whereas, you know, together with our colleagues from the tobacco group, we've managed to provide that information to the police. So in a matter of like 60 days, let's say 2 months, we were able, from the incident on a couple of cargo going by trains, to the point where police was able to actually knock on the doors of the guys that picked up the product and arrest them. So it's not only about having the technology, but how are you using it? And it's the only answer that we have to that, because, okay, we have the financial means to invest in the technology, I think, and that's something we should also focus on. But as a community, as a group, we should also focus on working on those options that actually serve the risk. You know, sometimes we just develop something and we think it applies from, I always use this example, it applies from implementing it in Croatia or implementing it in Mexico. You have a different setup of the risk profile of the countries, of the environment, so you cannot use the same technology and expect that you have the same result.
KARSTEN.
Yeah, I really liked, Fabio, that you were mentioning traceability, because this also supports with 2 other forms of crimes. First one is diversion. Things are popping up in countries or in regions or markets where this product shouldn't be for whatever reasons. And another one is counterfeits. I think all of us here have counterfeit cases, yeah, and with clothing it's a big issue, yeah, but it does not necessarily affect lives of people. Talking about malaria medicine, for example, in Southeast Asia, around about 35% of malaria medicine are counterfeits in pharmacies, yeah, and traceability can help a lot, yeah? And I think that's also something where the supply chain security industry can even develop a lot more, with more scanning options and all of that.
If you allow me, in terms of traceability, what you mentioned is also not just for theft, it's counterfeit, gray market. Because gray market destroy the revenue and profit for companies, and counterfeit destroy the life of persons, right? As you mentioned, medicine that you think that you're bio-original one is counterfeit. But I saw a lot of the stuff, and traceability you can put in a small box. For again, you can remove the paper, reduce the paper print, and make the people scan and say how I can use this, the medicine, how will it apply, blah blah blah. Can I get a discount? And when they scan that, the information goes to you, say, hey, the product that you sold in Slovakia is now in Australia. How? Because a shipment was stolen, counterfeit, whatever. You know, you can start creating like the rules, what you want. So traceability, as I mentioned, for me, I think is the future. All the manufacturers could do, Philip Morris, Unilever. By the way, I talk with your guys in Brazil about that, in Unilever. They are very interested about that. But the idea of traceability can create a new generation for us as security and counterfeit or brand protection teams to work better and help. Imagine one situation, as you mentioned, about talk with law enforcement. But imagine you receive a call like at 3 a.m. Hey, I have a truck here. I stop a truck. With this truck driver, the document is not okay. And I need to know if this product is yours, is original. You know normally how long you take to obtain this information inside of the company? Probably 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. It's normal. But if you have this process with traceability, you can get like in 1 minute, 30 seconds, and you can say, oh, this driver, this plate, this product, blah, 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 this serial number belongs to me and it was stolen here. Or no, or it's not my product. It was sold to my retailer company, blah, 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 and I give you the content.
We'll come to Julia and then to you, David. Julia.
Yeah, just a couple of remarks when it comes to technology. Even if you have the most sophisticated technology, there are also counter technologies like jammers. That's what we see most of the time. Second is, sometimes you have the driver involved. So he's not necessarily all the time the victim. Sometimes he's part of the whole gang. And third, sometimes even law enforcement is involved, depending on the country, right? So that's what we saw, especially in South America, but I assume South Africa is also an example for that. But sometimes you can even not rely on law enforcement, and that's becoming a problem. So the people that you're relying the most on, like your security providers or law enforcement, if they are part of the game, then it's becoming really difficult.
David.
Yeah, I think it was mentioned in the the DHL slides that you've got to really be agile, and this is where and you've got to move with the times. You can design the perfect truck. You can have an internal camera, a dash cam. You can have an external one. You can have alarming on the truck. You can have a hardened truck. You can have all these tactics to prevent theft. However, the adversary knows how to circumvent every one of them. In Brazil particularly, they have the military spec jammers. They'll jam that truck as it goes under the highway. So what we find we've won, this is where we've won, is putting sleeper tracker in the actual pallets without everyone knowing. So we had a classic case in Brazil, of all places, but it costs quite a lot because when you invoke the contract, you have to pay for a Cessna plane to go up in the sky with an RF reader to find the sleeper tracker. So the sleeper tracker sits in a dormant pallet that no one knows it's there. So keep your circle of trust close to the team that are working on the COVID operation. And then switch your tracker on when you know the truck's been diverted or the GPS tracker's been jammed. And then you send the Cessna up with the RF reader, and we cracked a major syndicate in the north of Brazil with that and a few others. So there's two operations here. One is your standard run-of-the-mill technology on a truck, which works 99% of the time. But when you see in the South Africas, the Brazils, the Saudis of this world, that there's a pattern developing, that's when you have to do an intervention with your supplier and say, well, there's two choices here. Either we stop using you as a supplier because actually, it's becoming a problem, and that's not always a solution. We partner with our suppliers. We go in and we say, let's solve this problem once and for all, and we target hard on our vehicles and our operation, and we catch the thieves. Sometimes they don't get criminal cases against them, but at least they know we're watching them, and that is a big deterrent in the long run.
Daniel, did you want to add anything to that? Because we've not heard from you on the topic.
Well, I'll say that for fashion retail as well, traceability it's very important, and thanks to the technology, actually, we can track the gross deliveries And also we can track the single garments thanks to RFID. We can know precisely which garment is like that, what have been produced, what have been sent, and if appears another way, it's easier to recognize it. But just to remember that technology for itself is not efficient. Of course, we need intelligence. We need as well prepared people, and above all, we need a strategy to use all of these tools to get the best profit. Otherwise, in many cases, that we do is more than loss prevention, we do loss reaction, which is good. But as the colleagues from Amazon said yesterday, even when you recovered totally or partially the losses, you never win. You lost. And that's why we do and we recommend, and in the working groups that we always say we need to work in prevention, especially. You see, it is not easy because sometimes when the prevention works, you don't see clearly the results, and you don't know if you did the things well or nothing happened because nothing was to happen. But the best investment, even in technology, is in the prevention.
And let's talk a little bit about losses specifically. David, I'll come to you first. What sort of average losses are you seeing per incident in Unilever, and particularly how do you capture those losses?
So yeah, I sort of touched on it earlier. We've had a system called Siren since over 10 years. That is critical. So Peter Megary is in the audience. He works with me as a colleague, and he's our analyst, and he spends most of his day working on Power BI and analyzing everything from where the incident happened, where the route was, who the supplier was, what the product was, the MO, etc. So everything's captured in the system, and we granularly try and understand it. We're having an interesting discussion at the moment because we've got a specific procedure with suppliers and with our internal people that if we lose above 50,000 euros, it becomes a major incident and it gets reported to our board, what we call our C-suite, so our Unilever leadership executive team, and it goes right to the CEO. Now, they all complaining to a certain degree that the 50K was put in place 10 years ago, and at the moment they should raise that to 150K because the 50,000 incidents are happening more often now. So it's becoming more prevalent that these incidents happen. I think our biggest loss in total was about 1.5 million, which was a syndicate operation. As I talked about earlier, these technologies where they put the fake haulers on, they actually intervened with the company's app, and they were so clever that the company, even with their checks, didn't realize that they were a phantom company, and they managed to divert 14 trucks to a specific warehouse. So that's how we report, and that's how we capture it. But you know, we try every day to win in the game and work with our suppliers, but it's still a big task. But I can also put a plug in for the TIS. Please do report on the system. We do, because the more that Interpol, the more that TAPA, and the more that BSI and TT Club can get that information out to partners, the more we'll understand where the risk is and how we're going to mitigate it.
Karsten, did you want to sort of follow up on that as well for you? What kind of average losses you're seeing and how you capture those losses? Ideally, I'll ask everyone if everyone's...
In the pharmaceutical industry, it's a bit difficult to say, especially because we see a lot more different crimes. We already talked about counterfeits. Talking about the vaccines, suddenly there was that issue with those counterfeited vaccination certificates and all of that, and having or measuring these losses, it's super difficult. Also from a reputational point of view, when you talk about, so not only about vaccines, but also about other medicines. If people are being harmed by not having the right medicine or pharmaceutical at hand, that can have a major reputational issue for the company. So no numbers from my side, but it can be a challenge.
Daniel.
Well, it's difficult to add something specific on fashion retail. I mean, losses traditionally have been counted on the percentage of the selling. But actually, most of companies changed their mind. And when we talk with our colleagues from other fashion companies, because the reduction of the production that many of us experienced since the pandemic and for different other reasons that we have been seeing during the whole convention, that actually we count more the losses for the number of units that we lose, because in many cases, we are not able to replenish those losses. So it gives more importance to the number of goods that we lose than the percentage of selling divided by the cost that was the traditional way of measure the losses.
Fabio, did you want to answer that as well? Maybe we'll come along the line if you're happy to, quickly.
I don't know, people, they will have time to ask questions to us?
Well,
I don't know, because...
we're all right for time at the moment.
Well, about the losses I can tell about Latam, as in the beginning I just mentioned that cargo hijacking is more than 100 per day. And I mentioned about facility invasions that is affecting everybody. Pilfereds, thefts in last mile. This is other situation that unfortunately our colleagues from Amazon, Mercado Libre, they are suffering a lot in the last mile. And us, obviously, that we calculate all the losses. And I think that everybody here from the manufacturer side is difficult to calculate the real value of the loss, because in sometimes, depending on what you're losing in terms of product, you cannot calculate how to bring back this product again for the market. And sometimes involves science overtimes, new products, shipping. I have a problem, for example, I can mention that way we have a government deal, and one shipment that was specifically produced for the government deal was stolen, was hijacked. And the problem was we don't have any more raw material to produce that, because it was just for this deal. So this is an example. So we contacted the ODMs, we contacted the factories to produce more raw material parts. These expenses is difficult to bring and calculate how is their real loss. So again, we know the value of the invoice. We cannot, it's extremely difficult to calculate the real losses for any manufacturer.
Did either of you two want to add anything, or we'll move on to Gino? Did you want to say something, Julia?
Look, everybody knows that when you are dealing with an excise product, you have a lot of taxes, then your losses can be anywhere from 50 to a couple of millions, and it's not gold. It's just it's just a commodity that people are using. But I will not. What I want to touch is not really the value, because it's sometimes when everybody knows it's. Some people say it's 5 times, some people say it's 7 times. It doesn't really matter. It's anyhow multiplied with something. I think what we've seen and the trend of managing those losses, or let's say putting more security around it and more resilience, is when you are actually bringing up to the management, which also David has mentioned. So we have created this, it can be called as a KPI, which goes every month to our board. When you say, you talk about the regions, what is your percentage of loss out of your total volume? And then these guys are very touchy when it comes to numbers. So in their head, they are pretty much aware of the fact that they can calculate market share. They can look at the financials. So it's more about how you make that loss visible. In the sense that you get it up on the table, so that you can not use it, but have it as a ground for you to take more measure or look into the directions which are not necessarily obvious. And I think when we talk about supply chain security, that would not exist, or we would not be successful if this doesn't sit on the agenda of higher management, whether that's a C-suite or whether that's even like in our case, within operations. So our SVP operations gets a monthly view on what are the losses, end to end. So it's either manufacturing or supply chain. And that drives decision making. So value is one, and always is important, but it's about how that percentage out of your total shipments, out of your total production plays into the factor. And with manufacturing having kind of optimizing everything up to the bone, you know, every loss has a huge consequence on your production planning and all the other processes that are there. So it's not necessarily the value of the loss in monetary terms. It's what is the greatest impact that that loss has.
Let's turn to sort of current criminal trends, which we've touched on a little bit already, but also emerging threats. David, let me come to you first. Are there any current trends that we haven't talked about and emerging threats that you see coming, and how do we stay ahead of those trends?
Yeah, I have talked about it, I think, 3 times, but it is the big one, in my opinion, the digital world that, you know, no longer, the supply chain's getting so big now, the consumer wants everything from his armchair delivered yesterday. So, you know, everyone's under pressure to deliver. And, you know, in our logistics chain, we are under pressure to get the product. We're overproducing because we just need to get the product into the consumer market. And ultimately, because of that, organized crime have taken advantage and they put these fake companies online. So I call it digital trust. It's like when you look at, you know, Facebook or LinkedIn or, you know, all these social media, I try to connect with people that I know. I know it's almost impossible because everyone sends you invites and you're connecting with people all the way through. But in the supply chain, I try to get that message across for logistics particularly. Do you have digital trust with that supplier? Do you know the supplier? Do you have you met the supplier? Have you looked at their financial records? Have you been to their head office? Have you you know, do they have their own fleet of vehicles, or do they subcontract down the line? And these are all the big questions you have to ask, because that's where we're losing the battle. The hijackings will always happen, and it's an unfortunate event. But when we investigate those, we pretty much get to the bottom of them, because, as I said earlier, there's a bunch of actors in the system. But the digital space, how these phantoms and ghosts move in that environment, is for me the biggest threat we're facing in the cargo discipline at the moment.
KARSTEN.
A couple of months ago, I heard the first time the word presilience. So how can we prepare for things that will be happening in a couple of years? And when we have a look on from that perspective, we see that geopolitics are becoming a bigger and bigger issue, and also climate change. Severe weather conditions, lack of water in megacities, that's already things that we are facing. And if I think about in all of our companies who will handle that, I'm a bit afraid that it will be on the shoulders of security. Yeah? And then we have to talk about it with the service providers again. Yeah? How can we handle these things in the next 5 to 10 years? And I think that's something that we really need to prepare for. The war in Ukraine showed us very, very harsh how things can change. Yeah? And how can we prepare for such things in the future? So it's not typical loss prevention topic, yeah, but I think it's really something that we in supply chain security need to think about.
GINO, I know that was something you wanted to talk about maybe, but maybe enough has been said. Would you like to add something else? No? Okay. Well, let me talk about law enforcement quickly, actually, because Julia, you mentioned them earlier, sometimes, in fact, being involved. But generally, do you think that law enforcement and other authorities are equipped to encounter crime along the supply chain?
I think I can make that one short. No. No, but I think it goes both ways, actually. I mean, obviously, here in the room are so many experts when it comes to supply chain security, but let's be honest, even some of the global players are not holistically prepared to cover security along the whole supply chain. And I think there's still a lack of education and awareness, and that goes also for law enforcement. So if I was to put something on the TAPA wish list here, then I would go for promoting more joint roundtables with law enforcement to tackle that topic, because I think there's still room for improvement on both sides, actually.
Fabio, did you want to add something? I could see you agreeing.
Well, I have a quick example. We have a theft, a cargo theft, hijacking, obviously, and we could identify the location that the criminals let the cargo. We have images, CCTV, drones, and we call the police. Say, hey, my cargo is right there. The answer is, so? I need you to go there Us? No. You say, what the heck? The cargo is there. Is a battalion for the military police. More than 50 men. Fabio, they will not go there. Forget it. So was, by the way, was in Rio de Janeiro. I traveled from São Paulo to Rio de Janeiro. I went to the office of the security secretary from Rio de Janeiro, wait for 2 hours, and my cargo is there. My team was observing the cargo, and sitting for 2 hours, and they come and say, hey, look, we need authorization from the governor, because if we create an action to just take your cargo, probably will be someone could be shot, and you appear in the television. So forget it. So that's the answer that you get in. I give an example from Brazil, but this is the same answer that you get for the entire region, unfortunately. That's the same answer. And normally, law enforcement in that region, in Latin America, they are not concerned with cargo theft. That's not their priority. Their priority is to protect people, because they are suffering thefts, kidnappings, rapes cases, a lot of situations. So cargo theft is not in their top priority in their agenda, unfortunately.
Gino, just a quick word on that, and then I'll just ask about...
Yeah, I mean, I will go with Julia's short answer, but I will add something. It very much depends on the law enforcement in the country, because sometimes you get a response out of them. And sometimes it's just a game of, what I would call the Jerry Maguire, help me so I can help you. And it's also the way we are managing our own engagement with it. We are all bound by, you cannot talk with law enforcement until you have a bunch of lawyers with you or stuff like that. But in reality, that can be made much more simpler. We have successful stories. I've mentioned Germany as being one, but we've also done in Latin America, in Colombia. In some situations, the guys are saying yes, so we go with you. I mean, we had situations where we went with them in the car with the laptop, just following the signal of the truck, and we've been able to pick up like 2 containers that we've been diverted 45 minutes ago, because we just went to the police and police said, yeah, let's go. So they just jump in a car. But in some situations said, hey, dude, it's 4 p.m., shift change, sorry. And you are like, excuse me? So, but I think it's also a role that we have to play within the organization, just being, I will not call it vocal, but actually selling the part of what is actually the real impact that has. And it's very much how we push it on the agenda of that specific country, and how important it is. If you go for things like gold, or if you go for like computers which can be used, or if you go for accessible products, then if the government has a stake into it because they are losing taxes or there is something for them there, then they will be able to react. But it's that, it's the trick of the trade, how you can make that happen and how you can really sell it to internally but also externally.
We've got just 5 minutes left, but David, I know you want to very quickly...
Yeah, I just want to echo the comments that have been said here, because it's an important topic. I mean, we've had big incidents. So in Africa, we deal with it by writing all the dossiers and doing all the investigation, getting the evidence, the forensic, and giving it to the police so that they get the big pats on the back and the big reward. But it's a system that works. In other markets, we have had cases, big cases, that we've gone to the police and we've said, we've got everything, this is what we would like you to do, we're not law enforcement, we can't make the arrest, we can't prosecute. And they've said, we know these people, they are part of a criminal gang, they are part of a syndicate that deals in human trafficking, they deal in drug, they launder money, they're part of the bigger picture and we can't react right now. So that, I don't know whether it's a holding statement, but we never hear the end of it. And that's very frustrating from a personal perspective.
Daniel, did you want to put something on? We've got 2 more questions to squeeze in.
Yeah,
Otherwise.
well, our experience is that in many of the regions where we operate, Asia, North America, and Asia, we got a very good support from the police when we talk about the supply chain robberies. and of course, some areas to improve, especially in South America. But in many cases, not only in roads, in airports or harbors, we got a very good support on that, and we could even arrive to the end or to solve who was behind the big losses that we had. Maybe the only problem to add is that in many cases, you need to do part of the work directly or subcontract investigation to create an attention to the case, because not always the cases are big enough to get immediately support. But in the end, I must say in general terms that we are satisfied.
I just wanted to ask a couple of you quickly, and Julia already mentioned something, more collaboration with law enforcement. But what benefits do you particularly gain from TAPA, and more importantly, what else are you looking for? Gino, did you want to say something on that?
Sure, I'll start. Well, I mean, we can talk for 30 minutes or even more about the benefits, but I think we need to take it, the benefit is not only for the end user, which is, you can say it's, you know, the ones that are sitting here. I think the benefit is end-to-end on the TAPA. And the benefit that I see, and we have been trying to be as active as possible within the organization, is actually educate the entire supply chain world. That's exactly what we want to do. Torsten said that we should put something on the wish list. So my wish list, my point on the wish list has been always, we have two organizations. Okay, Fabio comes from Latin America. We also have the guys in APAC. I think everybody here, or most of us, are global players. So I think the important part is like how we make this three organization kind of linking the dots. I know it's not always easy, but we have a role to play, and this is my call to action to everybody, to make sure that they are engaging in a similar way and fashion that we are engaging with TAPA EMEA, with also the other organization, and make sure that we make an even play field, which I think it's important. We as an organization, and this is why we have embedded the TAPA standards within our supply chain standards, and I think that's I would say that that's a statement in how important we know the standards are, and why we want to be to continue to be an active player. And then I think the benefits are there. It's just for us to grasp them.
Fabio, quick word from you, and then I have a quick question for you all to finish on.
Well, I can tell you guys that you are lucky because you have TAPA in EMEA. I don't have TAPA. I don't have in Latin America. We have a TAPA Americas. That's basically North America. They are not, unfortunately, we don't have nobody in Latin America. We cannot ask for certifications. I cannot ask for DHL. Look, I want all these warehouses with TAPA compliance. We don't have that since 2010, if I'm not wrong. So I'm begging to you, Marcel, that's in my front. You, because, and I talk with my colleague Alan, that's TAPA America's member. We need TAPA in Latin America. You guys need it because you have companies that you work, Unilever, BASF, Philip Morris, Bio. Are you there? You are suffering losses there. So, and you don't have that TAPA to support in you guys. You cannot ask for the vendors, okay, I want to, you can ask, but they say, you cannot put in the contract that you have TAPA compliance. So, I'm begging you guys, please helping us. I know that we are crying babies, okay, but we needed you guys. And,
it's officially noted.
Okay, finally, I get some attention here.
Just to wrap up before we all go off to lunch, Fabio, keep hold of the microphone, because I'm going to ask you all, what would your takeaway message, just in a sentence, be that you'd like logistics providers to hear from organizations like yourselves about supply chain resilience? What do you want them to take away from today?
I think it is communication. That's the most important for everything that we do, guys. You have an incident, talk, we can support, investigate, we can analyze what happened. I think all the flow for everything that happened, even that happened with other companies, we should share, we should discuss. TIS is a tremendous tool that can help in everybody. And I received the training for the team from TAPA, and I'm working with a group in Brazil to make this information flow going up. So communication is very important in my view.
David, I'll come to you and then Julia.
Yeah, so I realize I'm between us and lunch, so I'll be brief. But just on the feedback for TAPA, I mean, I'm a big fan. We joined a number of years ago. You know, the central team, we've done the, we've done the facility security requirement, the transport security requirement. I've yet to do the parking. I saw yesterday Marcus was going through the SR with the CCTV, and I think he ran into a problem in Germany, data protection. I don't get that. I see APAC have got a guarding standard, which I've looked at and I've been like, that's a good one. But a one I would think that would be good to have would be an investigation standard as well, because going back to the police collaboration, if we could work with our colleagues in Europol and Interpol and police forces across the nation and come up with some standard for investigating cargo, I think that would be a good one to develop, and we can do that together. And then just on takeaways for the partners, I realize everyone's probably nodding off at this stage, but who does business with Unilever? If you do, just raise your hands. So DHL, put your hands up. Google and Nagel, we have a lot of partners. So my takeaway is, there's an old African saying, which means if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And ultimately, we partner with our logistics providers. So whether it's warehousing or road or rail or marine cargo, doesn't matter. So I think that's the message, is we need to partner better. We need to work together and collaborate on these investigations and come up with really creative ways to mitigate the threat.
Thank you, Julia. Just a last message.
I think it's basically all said, and I couldn't agree more. There's another quote which I personally like. It's from Rudolph Giuliani. He used to be the mayor in New York, and he was saying it's time that we get as organized crime. And I think this is something we should work on. I mean, we are on a very good path already with the TAPA family here. And it's a huge benefit for us as global players, I have to say. I would like to have, as I said before, maybe slightly more exchange or platforms with law enforcement. And in terms of data, it would be great if we would come to a status where we would generate something like forecast, So if you have not the incidents reported and compiled, but if you would have the chance to go, yeah, that would be great, actually.
Predictive analytics, that was from the front row. Karsten, just a quick word from you, and then Gino and Daniel.
I just want to say thank you for the whole TAPA organization that we can be here. So I'm not sure if the most important things are happening inside of this room or outside of this room, because all of us being together and drinking some beer, wine, water, whatever, and chatting with each other, I think some brilliant ideas can come out of that, and I would like to thank you for the opportunity.
Gino?
Yeah, I think coming back to Fabio, we do have TAPA requirements in our contracts, even in South America, and we are pushing the engagement with Alan and Cindy and everybody there just to make sure that we are even the playing field. But I think, as I said before, as a call to action, I think and it's great that you've been here. I was very happy to see that someone from Latin America came to the conference, because it's also important for our colleagues to understand there is different ways of working and there's different challenges. But that's important that we sit together and then we drive that change. I mean, with TAPA EMEA, it only happened because everybody was onboarded. And then with the partners that we work and everybody else's work we are doing this for the benefit of everybody. This is not only the benefit of the end user, like a manufacturer, it's the benefit of the logistics provider, the second, third tier manufacturers, and so on and so forth. So I would come back to what I said before. I think it's just continue what we do, but talk more and be more open, because, when it comes about supply chain criminality, there's no competition among us.
And a final word, Daniel, from you.
To finalize, we are now more than 10 years with TAPA and have been a very profitable investment. So we got a lot of information from the intelligence tool, sharing with colleagues, trainings, and a lot of knowledge in supply chain resilience. So it's a very efficient investment, for sure.
Well, we will leave it there because lunch is on the horizon, and as Karsten said, much valuable stuff is done over there as well. So thank you all to all of our panelists for joining us today.